My parents gave my inheritance to my sister, so I bought the bank that foreclosed on them. What happened next was unbelievable. I will tell you how everything unfolded. Before then, we share stories like this every day. If you love them, don't forget to subscribe. We are on a journey to our first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. Kindly leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We'd love to stay connected. Now let's get into the details of the story. The room was heavy with sorrow, yet beneath it all, a quiet tension lingered. Grandfather had passed after a long battle with illness, and family gathered in that old church where memories clung to the wooden pews. I stood near the back, watching faces I barely recognized, all wearing their grief differently. Some wept openly, others remained stoic. My parents' eyes were red-rimmed but distant. Kelsey clung to Mom's arm, too fragile for the world, or so they said. I felt invisible, just the background noise in a story that wasn't mine. When the reading of the will was announced, my heart sank before the words even left the lawyer's mouth. The house, the land, the money, all of it was left to Kelsey. I blinked, thinking I'd misunderstood. Adam, my mother whispered, she needs it more. It wasn't a question, it was a decree. My sister, drowning in debt, reckless and careless, was the chosen one. I was the forgotten son, the shadow in their eyes. They looked at me like I was an afterthought, like the blood I shared with them was somehow less valuable. The lawyer's voice droned on, but I barely heard it. I stared at my hands, clenched tight in my lap. My chest tightened with a cold fire, burning from betrayal and humiliation. I wanted to shout, to demand fairness, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood, excused myself, and left before the room could see my breaking point. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, the sky gray and unforgiving. I felt smaller than ever, like a boy who had lost his place in the world. Back at home, the confrontation was inevitable. My father sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, his expression unreadable. My mother's eyes filled with a mix of pity and resolve. She needs this chance, Adam, Mom said softly. You have your life ahead of you. Kelsey, she's struggling. I wanted to scream that I had struggled in silence, that I had sacrificed more than they knew. But I swallowed the words. Instead, I packed my bag, the weight of their judgment heavier than the few clothes I could carry. That night, I lay on a worn couch in a friend's cramped apartment, the city noise muffled through the thin walls. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment, the will, the cold looks, the finality of their decision. My hands shook with quiet fury. If I was worth nothing to them, I thought, then I'd build something they couldn't afford to ignore. The spark of vengeance was born not from hate, but from the raw ache of being erased. Tomorrow, I told myself, would be the start of a new fight. Days turned into weeks. I worked odd jobs, pushed myself harder than ever, always with that fire inside. Every dollar I earned was a step away from the family that had cast me aside. I didn't reach out to them. Their calls went unanswered. Their attempts to explain felt like salt on a wound too fresh to heal. They had chosen her, and now I would choose myself. I wouldn't be the son they wanted, but the man they'd regret losing. I kept that promise burning, fueling every sleepless night and early morning. Sometimes, I saw my sister's face in headlines, another credit card maxed out, another eviction notice. My parents sent me messages, half-hearted apologies wrapped in excuses. I deleted them without a second thought. The man they tried to erase was becoming a force they couldn't control. The house I grew up in, once a symbol of family and security, was slipping away. But this loss was mine to own, and I would reclaim it, piece by piece. The debt that chained my sister would be the key to their downfall. The city around me was a battlefield, and I was learning its language. I studied markets, read legal papers late into the night, and connected with people who understood struggle. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The silence became my armor, my secret weapon. I was no longer the boy waiting for a handout. I was becoming the man who would take back what was his. And when the time came, I wouldn't ask for their forgiveness. I'd make them pay attention. On a cold winter morning, as the sun barely broke through the clouds, I stood outside the family home. It was quieter than I remembered, the paint peeling, the garden overgrown. The place that once held laughter and fights now felt like a graveyard of promises broken. My parents hadn't seen me in months. They didn't know what I was planning. But soon, everything would change. The will that buried me wasn't the end. It was the foundation for the empire I'd build without them. I looked up at the cracked windows and whispered to myself, if I was worth nothing to them, I'd build something they couldn't afford to ignore. That night, I closed my eyes, imagining a future where I stood tall, not as their forgotten son, but as the man who owned the past they tried to erase. And this time, the story would be mine to write. The fire inside me wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for revenge. The nights were the hardest. After long days working 2 jobs, I found myself drifting between exhaustion and determination. I'd sleep in the backseat of my old, beat-up car when no one offered a couch. The concrete was cold and unforgiving, but I never complained. Every dollar I earned went into a battered savings account, a small fortress I built with broken hands. The dreams of rebuilding my life rested on those scraps, fragile but unyielding. The city didn't slow down for me. At the diner, I wiped tables and poured endless cups of coffee, forced smiles hiding the bitterness inside. Then, at night, I switched gears, stocking shelves in a hardware store until the early morning. My body screamed for rest, but my mind was already chasing the future. I didn't talk about my struggles. No one needed to know. I had a plan, and it didn't include pity. Public libraries became my sanctuary. I devoured online courses on real estate finance, property management, and investment strategies. Legal jargon that once seemed impenetrable now made sense, page after page, lecture after lecture. I sat under flickering fluorescent lights, headphones on, world outside fading away. The quiet hum of the computers and rustling of pages was the soundtrack to my quiet rebellion, a way to turn knowledge into power. One late night, while scrolling through foreclosure listings, my stomach twisted into knots. There it was, the address of my childhood home. The place I grew up in, now marked as one of the bank's next targets. Kelsey had defaulted on every payment. My parents' recklessness had caught up with them, and the consequences were staring them down. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction, but I kept silent. They didn't deserve my pity. Calls flooded in from my mother and father, panicked and desperate. "Adam, we need your help," they begged. But I said nothing. The silence was louder than any argument. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled Acquisition Targets. It was more than just a list. It was a promise. A roadmap to reclaim what was stolen and build something that would stand long after they were gone. Rentals slipped through my fingers, denied because of poor credit tied to debts I never cost. The system was rigged against me, but every rejection only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting to survive, I was fighting to win. Nights spent poring over legal documents became my new normal. I learned about liens, auctions, and bidding wars. The language of real estate was becoming my weapon, sharpening with each page turned. Friends asked why I kept going, why I didn't just give up. They didn't understand. Giving up wasn't an option. My past was littered with broken promises and shattered trust, but my future was mine to claim. I pictured the house, the bank threatening to take it away, and I smiled bitterly. Funny how the house they stole from me was circling the drain. Soon, I thought, it would be mine again, on my terms. Every day was a battle, but with each small victory, a saved dollar, a lesson learned, I was building something stronger than regret. The weight of rejection and exhaustion pressed down, but the fire inside never dimmed. I wasn't just rebuilding a house, I was rebuilding myself. The foundation was shaky, but the vision was clear. I would take what was lost and turn it into power no one could ignore. The city's skyline glittered with promises, and I was ready to claim mine. The man they cast aside was coming back, smarter, stronger, and ready to rewrite the rules. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. The foreclosure notice was just the beginning. The house that belonged to my family was sinking, and I was the storm ready to pull it from the wreckage. I wouldn't stop until they knew my name. The moment I handed over the check for my first property, the weight of the world didn't lift. Instead, it settled heavier on my shoulders. That small duplex was more than a building. It was a lifeline and a test. I couldn't afford rent, so I slept on the floor, surrounded by bare walls and an air of uncertainty. But every night spent on that cold floor was a night closer to reclaiming control over a future they tried to bury. I worked relentlessly, patching walls, repainting, and fixing every creak and crack the previous owners left behind. The neighbors didn't know my story. They saw a quiet man turning a neglected property into a home. The flip was grueling but successful. When I finally sold that duplex, the profit wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that my plan, my struggle, was not a dead end but a beginning. Meanwhile, the news told a different story for my family. Articles showed my parents desperate, eyes pleading for refinancing on the very house they had let slip through their fingers. The headlines whispered of financial ruin and shattered dreams. I read every article silently, the taste of bitter irony sharp on my tongue. They were scrambling, and I was quietly building. The tables were turning, but no one noticed yet. Then came the call from my lawyer, the moment I'd waited for in silence. "Adam," she said, voice steady but charged, "they accepted your offer." My heart didn't race, but my mind sharpened. Months of paperwork, layers of secrecy, and careful moves had culminated in this instant. I was now the majority owner of the very bank holding the mortgage that was crushing my family. It was a quiet victory no one saw coming. I set up a shell company to keep my identity hidden. No press releases, no announcements, just cold, calculated moves behind closed doors. Every signature I made, every document I signed, was a step deeper into power. They had given away my future, thinking I was nothing. Now, I owned theirs. The irony was delicious, and the silence was my weapon. The bank was struggling, downsizing fast. Employees whispered about layoffs and uncertain futures. I listened from the shadows, absorbing every detail. This was my moment. While they were busy fighting fires, I was quietly taking control. It was a slow, precise game of chess, and I was 3 moves ahead. My nights were consumed with strategy. I studied the bank's finances, policies, and loopholes. I built alliances with a few trusted insiders, always careful to remain unseen. The power I was amassing wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was deliberate and ruthless. I wasn't just investing in property anymore. I was investing in influence. The memory of my parents' faces, worn and desperate in those news articles, fueled me. They had chosen to give everything to my sister, drowning us all in debt and neglect. But I was patient. I learned to wield patience like a blade, cutting through their false sense of security. One day, they'd realize the man they ignored was now the one pulling the strings. Owning the bank meant more than control over money. It meant control over their fate. Every mortgage, every loan, every foreclosure notice, they would pass through my hands. I was the gatekeeper now, the unseen force shaping the destiny of the family that had cast me aside. The power felt intoxicating but carried a weight I never expected. In the quiet hours, I pictured the confrontation I'd never allow. The moment they'd come crawling, begging for mercy, and I'd be the one deciding their fate. But this wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice. They chose recklessness over responsibility, and I was here to balance the scales. I kept my identity secret from everyone. Claire, my one confidant, understood the stakes. She helped me navigate the legal labyrinth and reminded me to stay focused. "You're building something no one else dared," she said once. I nodded, knowing the truth of her words. This was my redemption, carved out in silence and strategy. Months passed in the shadowed dance. The deal closed quietly, the papers signed, the power transferred. The bank was mine, quietly, completely. The man who once slept in a car, who was written off by his family, was now the one holding the cards. They didn't know it yet, but their fate was sealed. As I sat back in my modest apartment that night, the weight of what I had accomplished settled in. It wasn't just a business move. It was the first real step in a plan years in the making. The bank, the property, the power. It was all mine now. The future was no longer something stolen from me, but something I controlled. The silence in the room was heavy but satisfying. I allowed myself a small, rare smile. They gave away my future, thinking I'd disappear. Instead, I owned theirs. And this was only the beginning. The phone rang endlessly in my pocket. I didn't answer at first, but the voicemail stacked up. My mother's voice, strained, shaky, growing more frantic by the hour. "Adam, please, we need to talk. It's urgent." Then, the messages became desperate. "Call us back, Adam. We don't know what to do." My sister's recklessness had finally caught up, and now the fallout was crashing down on them. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks from the old house, staring at the peeling paint and cracked windows. The place I grew up in looked like a shadow of itself, over-leveraged and crumbling under years of neglect and missed payments. Kelsey had drained everything, and now the bank was coming for it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house they'd kept from me was drowning in debt. My fingers tightened around the foreclosure notice in my jacket pocket. It was official, stamped with deadlines and legal jargon that spelled disaster. I could feel the weight of it, heavier than any brick in that broken home. When I finally walked up to the door, I was met with stunned faces. My parents hadn't expected me. Their shock was palpable, as if seeing me reminded them of the consequences they'd ignored. My mother's eyes welled up, her hands trembling as she stepped back to let me in. My father's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of hope beneath the anger. I pulled out the notice and placed it on the table without a word. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the rustle of papers and their heavy breaths. I turned to leave, the cold distance I'd built hardening into stone. Just as I reached the door, my father grabbed my arm. "Please, Adam," he said, voice cracking, "talk to the bank. They'll listen to you. You can help us." I stopped, the grip firm but desperate. Slowly, I turned, meeting their eyes with a calm they hadn't seen before. "They do," I said quietly, "because I am the bank." The room froze. The truth hit harder than any blow. I saw the shock in their faces, the sudden weight of realization sinking in. They had treated me like a stranger, a failure. Not knowing the power I'd quietly built behind their backs. I didn't say more. The message was clear. The man they ignored was now the one who held their fate in his hands. I walked out without another word, leaving them with the truth and the foreclosure notice. Driving away, I didn't look back. I didn't need their apology or explanations. What mattered was they understood the price of their choices. I wasn't here to forgive or forget. I was here to make sure they felt the consequences of the recklessness they'd rewarded. My silence was louder than any argument. The bank's cold machinery was now theirs to face. I sat in the car, windows down just enough to hear the low rumble of the moving truck pulling away from the house. Boxes, furniture, memories, being hauled out of the place my parents once called home, a place they had dismissed as mine years ago. Now, they were tenants of fate, forced out by their own recklessness. My sister was gone, vanished somewhere between court summons and unpaid debts. The pride they carried had been reduced to dust. The street felt emptier without their presence, like a wound finally scabbing over. I hadn't come here to gloat or savor their downfall. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclamation. I had signed the final papers that morning. The deed was back in my name. The house that was stolen from me was mine again, not as a trophy, but as a symbol. Proof that the past could be rewritten on terms I controlled. Walking through the empty rooms, I saw the faded wallpaper peeling like the lies they told. I touched the windowsill where I used to sit, dreaming of a life they said I'd never have. Now, the house would serve someone else, a new chapter, a fresh start. I arranged for renovations, called in the contractors, and set the rental price. Soon, tenants would call me Mr. Carter, not the estranged son. I didn't linger on their eviction notice pinned to the front door. It was legal, final, and merciless. The same law they had once used to silence me was now my tool. I'd watched from the sidelines as their world unraveled, my parents scrambling to find shelter, humiliated in their own community. Kelsey's name appeared in court files marked unreachable. The sister they favored had vanished, leaving them to face the wreckage. Back in my office, I sat behind a glass door with my name etched in bold letters. The city skyline stretched behind me, a reminder of everything I'd built from scratch. Claire, my assistant, tapped her tablet and glanced up. "You've got another email from your mom," she said quietly. Her tone was neutral, but I saw the hesitation. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, watching the steam rise. Taking a slow sip, I considered the message I'd get if I opened it. Please, regrets, maybe blame. None of it mattered anymore. I looked up, meeting Claire's eyes with calm finality. "Delete it," I said. "No room for the past. No space for half measures." The office door closed behind her, leaving me alone with the future I'd fought to create. The house they couldn't afford was just the beginning. I was done being the forgotten son. Now, I was the one who held the keys. Sometimes, The hardest battles aren't fought with fists or words. They're won in silence, with every choice made when no one is watching. I didn't seek their forgiveness or their approval. I built a future they couldn't take away. This story isn't just about loss or revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth when everyone else doubts you. If you found Adam's journey powerful, hit the like button and share this story with someone who's ever been underestimated. Subscribe for more gripping tales of resilience and justice. And tell me, what would you do if you were in Adam's shoes? Drop your thoughts below. I'm reading every comment. See you soon in the next story.